welcome into the ONTV Fantasy Football League podcast. And it's the final episode of the season. We skipped out a few weeks because things came up. Somebody became a dad. I don't know who that would be.
Life got in the way.
But we have to recap. We have to go over the championship. We have our champion in the building, Ian Witherspoon. How do you feel? Are you feeling it?
I feel good, man. I feel real good.
Yeah.
I don't feel so hot.
Yeah, I don't feel great either because I have to hand this off to Ian. But
There it is.
to the
Take care
rightful
of it.
place. It will no longer be my headphone holder at my desk.
Oh,
So
that's too bad.
it's unfortunate.
Got to
Take
earn that
the,
back next year.
Take
Yeah.
the baby photo off the mantle and
Yep.
put this on the mantle.
Yeah. You're 3. That's great. Here, put that here.
So, Ian, how did your championship go? How did you feel about it? Were you excited? Just give us a little recap of how you felt.
Sure, definitely excited. I had my doubts I'd get by Tracy because she was a buzzsaw
Mm-hmm.
She was.
for most of the year.
Yeah, Joe didn't pick you to win, so
No.
No problem there because I didn't pick me to win either. But no, definitely very excited. Happy to beat her because she's a young upstart, you know?
Yeah.
she's still early in her game.
And she has grown, especially through the year last year.
Right.
And coming into this year, killed the draft,
Mm-hmm.
killed the waiver wire, killed everybody.
Yep.
So it felt good in one game that mattered to win.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So looking at the last game, the total points, Ian put up 147 and Tracy put up 132. And from Ian's side, Justin Herbert had a strong finish to the season. He put up 24 points. St. Brown, your first overall draft pick, put up 20. Mike Evans, as they tried to just give him 1,000 yards, he also got 2 touchdowns in the
Yeah, you
championship
benefited from that.
for 29 points. Saquon Barkley, who was the big fantasy MVP for a lot of people, he had 167 yards, 2 catches, no touchdowns, but he had 19 points. You did get only 0.1 from Ramondre Stevenson in the championship, which is kind of funny. Brock Bowers, I would say Rookie of the Year candidate, put up 14.6. Jaden Reed, who was very hit or miss all season, put up 1. And then DJ Moore, and then Tampa Bay just playing really good at the end of the season, gets Carolina in the championship, gave you a lot of points from the defense and the kicker. And then on Tracy's side, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, they did their thing. Joe Burrow had 37 points. Jefferson had 17. Jamar Chase, 19. Chase Brown kind of had a down game. He had 13. Joe Mixon had 6 points. Sam Laporta came on strong for the Lions at the end of the season, got a lot of touchdowns. He had 18 in the championship. And then Devontae Adams and Zay Flowers didn't really do a whole lot in this game. And then she had the funniest game, I think, of the season. She had the Colts defense against the Giants when Drew Lock decided to throw, I think, 4 touchdown passes, maybe 5.
Screwed up their high draft pick.
Yeah,
I think
and
it was 5. Oh
I think it was
my
5.
gosh.
And the Colts got minus 4 points for that.
Oh.
When a lot of fantasy experts said, stream the Colts defense. And then Drew Lock says, you're not getting the number 1 pick before I leave.
You know what's interesting about what you just said, recapping the score? So many of those names you threw out on both sides, your team and Tracy's team, were players that made headlines all season long, from Barkley to Burrow to Chase and Jefferson. It's no coincidence that those were your players in the championship game. Those are the guys who got you there.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that, St. Brown was your number 1 pick. Any regrets there? I mean, obviously you won the championship, but, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but what would you have done differently at the number 1 pick? Would you have still gone with St. Brown or?
Yeah, he's my guy. Just as a fan, but also in fantasy because he's very reliable.
Yeah.
He's super
Consistent.
reliable.
That's what you want in fantasy is consistency.
He's never hurt. You don't have to worry about, you got 1 bye week to deal with,
Yeah.
while he's out. So I try in my fantasy leagues to draft similarly across them all. And I, if possible, make sure I can get him first overall and just don't fool around with it.
Interesting.
I always think a good sound advice that I've heard from a lot of people too in the past is that, you don't want to lose your fantasy draft in the first round. And
Right.
there's so many players that we've seen over the past few years. You think of McCaffrey that's gotten hurt in the past. Justin Jefferson got hurt last year when he was the, quote unquote #1 pick. So there's been like that #1 overall pick curse, similar to like a Madden curse, where you can lose in the first round. So if you play it somewhat safe, like I think St. Brown is more safe.
Yeah.
There's some merit to that, I think.
I'm grateful that I didn't have the second pick in the draft, because you passing on McCaffrey and having McCaffrey hang out there like a big old matzo ball, that basically sabotaged Becky's season, right? She had the #2 pick in the draft.
No, I believe she had #3.
How did who had the second pick?
We can jump right into it. I think I believe Malik had the second pick.
Okay.
Yeah, Malik had the second pick, and he took Tyreek Hill.
Okay.
That's what I was going to bring up, because the year previous he won leagues for people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was one of the biggest busts, and believe me, I know a thing or two about season busts. I had a team full of them. I was really high on Ayuk because he had signed this lucrative contract just before the start of the season. I thought he's going to be a top 3 wide receiver during the season, and didn't help that I got auto-drafted at one point. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I was doing too much talking and ended up
you were monologuing.
And I got Ayuk and
now, let me tell you how to draft here, folks. Listen up.
Yeah, and then what just happened? What's going on? And so I got off on the wrong foot there. So I ended up with both Debo and Ayuk, who were two of the biggest busts in the 2024 season.
It also didn't help that your first-round pick was Breece Hall, who was also
another
a pretty big bust.
Yeah,
Oof.
he's almost at the top of the list. I mean, McCaffrey, you can argue, but injuries shouldn't contribute to that. But you would argue that McCaffrey's probably the biggest bust of the season, only because you got a couple games out of him. But Breece Hall was right up there, and I blame Aaron Rodgers for his woes.
Right.
But see, the bigger problem with those, like you're saying, I would also agree that non-injuries are a worse bust, because you're always contemplating, do I continue to play that player? Whereas Christian McCaffrey, he's out. You're like, okay, I don't have to worry about him. Breece Hall, he had a couple games here and there that he played good. So you're like, do I sit my first overall pick on my team?
Exactly.
Like, that's so hard to do sometimes, especially playing fantasy. So,
but that's one of the top stories of the season is the injuries. Injuries were just mind-numbing. Yeah. In the other league that we're in, I tallied up the number of players that I drafted and picked up on waiver wires and obtained in trades, and I think I lost like 12 guys during the season.
Dang.
That's how do you can't recover from that.
Yeah, I told Joe that he needs to give me his list next year of who he's drafting so I know who to watch out for.
Yeah, and I pray for those guys that I draft. I don't want them to get hurt, but my luck this season was so awful, and it carried over to our ONTV league, because some of the players I had in ONTV I had in the other league, and I would lose them in both leagues. And
that's the risk when you draft across the board or try to draft.
And see, that's where I'm also just weird in that way, where I don't like having the same team. I'm in 3 leagues, and I had like 1 or 2 players that would cross over between all my leagues.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The funny one is Mark Andrews this year, because he had such a slow start. I got rid of him in almost all those leagues, and then he finished really strong. So it bit me in the butt. But for the most part, I like to just change it up and have different teams for each league.
So doesn't that
it makes
when you're
it hard
watching
on
games?
Yes.
It's like so frustrating.
It makes it a little bit crazy, but also you have more opportunities to score.
You do, yeah.
But then sometimes it's like, oh, this guy's doing really good in this league, this guy's doing good in this league, and then all my teams are kind of just average. And this year it didn't work out. This was one of my worst fantasy years of all time.
Really?
Yeah, the only person who seemed to have bad luck is mine was Joey. Like, we both week after week would just gripe to each other. It's like we had to console each other every Monday.
In my ESPN league, I missed the playoffs for the first time in I don't know how long. In this league, I barely made the playoffs. And then in our big league, I got bounced in the first round of the playoffs. And then my team proceeded to be the highest scoring team the final 2 weeks of the season.
So annoying.
So it's just like one of those things where it was just a rough season for me. But makes it more exciting for next year.
I sent a message to you because the championship week where you played Tracy, I outscored both of you, and it was so frustrating because I just barely made the cut to make the playoffs, and I won the first round of the playoffs. I'm like, oh, wow. And then just barely lost the next week and then outscored both of you. And I'm like, oh, man.
That's why normally I wouldn't look at my team any longer after that, just in that case. Mm-hmm. But in our big league, you get points for being the highest scorer on the season. And I was still in the running for that because my team had put up back-to-back 200-point games. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a chance if the top guy has a bad game, I could be the top scorer of the season. But I didn't. So I saw my team basically win a championship if they didn't get out in the first round, which is, that's not a real thing, but that's just how it feels.
Yeah, I'm looking at my week one roster. And keep in mind, and I mentioned this on every podcast, that we had an 8-team league. So your team is just star-studded.
Yeah.
In week one, I started Purdy as my quarterback. He was kind of hit and miss during the season. Then he got hurt late. Debo was a big bust. Godwin, IR. Brees Hall, bust. Kyron Williams did pretty well for me. He was one of the few consistencies I had. Ferguson, the tight end, had a disappointing season after a stellar season the year prior. Pacheco missed, was
most
injured week one, came back, week 15 or something.
Right.
Diggs was like, oh, my God, he was the steal of the draft. I was so happy with him. I play him every week. And he went on IR. Ayuk, IR. Eckler missed a big chunk of the season. And then Ford with the Browns, who I was hoping was going to kind of take advantage of his situation with Hubbard still on, or not Hubbard, Cleveland Brown running back.
Nick Chubb.
Chubb.
Yeah.
And
Chubba Hubbard.
So I thought Ford was going to take advantage of that and then maybe be the number 2 quarterback when Chubb came back, and Ford never lived up to expectations, and then he got hurt. So it was a curse.
Now, is there anything you feel like you can take away from that?
I got 2 for you right now.
Go ahead.
Don't draft Jets. Don't draft Browns.
That's a good.
It's not bad. Even though I do have a soft spot for the Browns, I'm not a fan of the Jets, and I'm mad at myself in hindsight drafting any Jets players because I hate Rodgers with a passion. I've made that clear on this podcast. But
you did draft him. You
Oh,
remember that?
Oh, that was in the other. Again, I was grandstanding and auto-drafted Rodgers.
You were talking about how much you hate Rodgers.
Yeah.
That's like going to the polls and accidentally voting for Trump.
Right,
I'm like, I did what now?
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of Rodgers, and I shouldn't have drafted Brees Hall. But you had poached Bijan from me, just one pick in front of me. That killed me.
Yeah, and because he was my number 1 outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown, I thought because I had the number 5 pick, I thought, well, it is, there's always the possibility of homers getting taken. So I thought maybe St. Brown could be there, but then Ian took him first overall. So I'm like, well, I got to go with Bijan now.
Yeah.
Because I knew McCaffrey wasn't going to make it. So.
And he was.
But what about
good.
Saquon? Why did I get Saquon in the second round?
The end of the second round.
Yeah.
I think because just, coming from the Giants and then nobody fully knowing what he would look like with the Eagles. I just don't think people fully bought into it.
In hindsight,
Yeah.
the Eagles has consistently had one of the best O-lines in the NFL.
And
I don't know why we didn't see that on draft day.
The way Philly's season ended, the year prior with that loss, they stumbled into the playoffs.
Right.
And the way Saquon, like you mentioned with the Giants, but man, when he was sitting there, I'm like, their O-line is way too good. He's on a 2-year deal. He's way too motivated. He did not get the big contract. It's a no-brainer. I cannot let him pass me again.
And the other thing that people were nervous about is that when you want a good running back, most of the time you need touchdowns.
Right.
And Jalen Hurts is known for stealing touchdowns.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that occurred to me on draft day. I thought Hurts was going to take a lot of TDs away.
Yeah.
And the running back not only this year they've had a resurgence, I would say, in the position, but and that's another reason why I'm gung ho on Amon-Ra first because most leagues are PPR now.
Right.
And that guy's going to catch 6 falling out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
So.
And that's the thing. Saquon didn't catch a lot of passes this year, so there's chances that next year he could not be as good as he was this year. So it's one of those things. And I'm looking at the draft board right now, and I took Jahmyr Gibbs in the middle of the second round. So that also played into Ian taking St. Brown. Then when it comes to my pick and I see Jahmyr Gibbs there, I'm like, I need a homer pick because this is where I want to get one. And so then I'm like, well, I guess I'll kind of reach a little bit for Jahmyr Gibbs. And then right after him, the next 2 running backs are Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, who had outstanding seasons. So
yeah, well,
that's
Gibbs
not
isn't
that
a
3, right?
consolation prize.
Now, the
No,
only good thing is Jahmyr Gibbs had an outstanding end of the season because of David Montgomery's injury, but it hurt me during the regular season when he was splitting time a little bit.
Yeah. See, I'm old school. I've been playing fantasy for 20 years, and what's been ingrained in my brain is you start off running back heavy. If you can get 2 running backs in the early rounds, then go to wide receiver, you're doing well. And so I went into that draft just RB, focused on RB, and I wanted Bijan. He disappears in front of me, and so you look at the cheat sheet and you go, well, the next guy on the list is Brees. So I'm like, all right, he's my consolation prize. I'll take Brees, and it blew up in my face.
Now that's something I wanted to ask you about because so your first 3 picks were Brees Hall, Kyron Williams, and Isaiah Pacheco. Yeah. One was a bust. One worked out really well.
And one got hurt.
And one got hurt and got put on IR. Then your next wide receiver that you're left with is Brandon Ayuk, who got on IR, which is unlucky. Then you get Debo, who got a terrible season, which is also unlucky. And then you go to Jake Ferguson. Like, do you think you would change your running back strategy a little bit? Like, would you have rather taken, I guess there's not too many, like, I guess the other running backs are there that you could have taken.
See, I remember that moment after getting my first 2 running backs, and then it came back to me. Pacheco was just hanging out there like, low-hanging fruit. And I'm like, I expected him, and I think everybody expected him to be a top 5 back. And I just couldn't, I didn't want to wait for it to come back to me later, knowing that Pacheco might be gone. And so, I had 3 running backs out of the gate, but I thought I had 3 great running backs. Yeah. And injuries bit me, and
because my biggest draft day regret is that I went running back in a 8-person league because I got Bijan and then Jahmyr Gibbs, which was 2 great picks. Yeah. But my next pick after that was Devontae Adams.
Who didn't get going until week 16?
He had 4 good weeks.
Now he started with the Raiders and then made his way to the Jets, and he had a little bit better ending to the season, but he was a headache all season long for me. And then I went with Josh Allen, who is basically Mr. Consistent in fantasy. So I still like that.
He had some big games.
But I think I would have rather taken another wide receiver somewhere in there before, like maybe running back, wide receiver, or wide receiver, running back, just to keep my depth better.
The one thing that I've brought up many, many times on this podcast was that 8th seat. Tracy in that 8th seat. When it got to her and we had all taken our running backs and stuff, she gets Chase and Jefferson with back-to-back picks. And I remember my jaw hanging open like, oh no, how did we let that happen? And they finished top 5, didn't they? Chase and Jefferson?
Yeah. Jamar Chase was number 1.
Right. Yeah. And so right then I'm like, I think we're in trouble here.
Yeah.
And then she ends up with Burrow, who has
she killed it, man.
Record-breaking season.
The craziest part was her 3rd pick was Chris Olave, and then her 4th pick was Sam Laporta. But if she didn't do that, obviously this is all hindsight, available players, she could have had Josh Jacobs and Nico Collins to also round out her roster. Now, Nico got a little bit hurt here and there, but
I was not so high on Josh Jacobs going.
I wasn't either. He was kind of the same boat for me as Barkley. A good player, but I just don't know how he's going to fit into that new offense. Yeah. And man, by the end of the season, they stopped using Jordan Love.
Yeah.
They didn't even throw the ball. So that was kind of a big surprise to me. Any other has your thoughts on quarterback changed at all? Because I think that was a contentious one last year with you taking Mahomes. Marie took Mahomes this year because she felt like it was a good value, but none of the top quarterbacks fully, unless you got Lamar or Josh Allen, they took a while to get going. Joe Burrow got there eventually.
Yeah.
But do you just wait on quarterback? Is that how you usually go? Or
Well, again, running backs have always been my priority, followed by trying to get a couple of good wide receivers. At the beginning of the season, the tight end pool was really shallow. So I'm like, I need a tight end. And I grabbed Ferguson, who had, like I said, a nice season last season, but didn't follow that up. But whether it's an auction draft or a snake draft, I think you can wait on quarterbacks because you just don't know. I mean, who could have predicted Jaden Daniels was going to have the season that he had? And yeah,
I took him in 2 drafts, but not this. I got him in this league eventually, but I don't remember if I drafted him or not.
No, my strategy, I don't know if I'm going to tip my cards here, but my strategy next draft will be similar. I want 2 top-tier running backs, 2 top-tier wide receivers before I start looking at quarterbacks, and it's a crapshoot.
Unless you can get a differentiator like
Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson.
Like Jackson and Allen.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about Mahomes is, the Chiefs win championships season after season, but he is not a league winner. He's not a fantasy league winner. And not last year.
He has. Right.
Yeah.
No, I had him last year, and he was on my bench the second half.
They've been leaning on their defense a lot more, and he'll have some big games every once in a while, but Allen and Jackson just run so much more, too, and get those rushing touchdowns that's where it really saves them. That's where we've seen Jalen Hurts as well, but when they added Saquon, they didn't throw the ball as much, so lost some value there. But
so, no, I wouldn't have a different strategy next draft. I'm still going to do running back, wide receiver, quarterback, and then
make my notes here.
I was going to say, Ian, did you have any strategy going into it that you would change or anything like that of that?
I got lucky getting Saquon. Typically, I undervalue running backs, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could try to, because like you mentioned, Stevenson was my other guy.
Yeah.
I was gripping at whatever straws throughout the year to find somebody next to Saquon. So that is definitely one of my blind spots because I just get so sucked in by pass catchers.
Yeah.
And then if I could grab a Lamar or a Josh, I would. I'd reach early for one of those guys. So I would say the running back position is something and maybe there will be more available with this focus on running more league wide.
Yeah, and I will say this upcoming running back draft is really good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good.
The Boise State guy.
Yeah, Ashton Genty. There's, what is it, Caleb Johnson out of Iowa.
Okay.
There's is Arizona State.
Oh, right. That white dude?
Multi-dimensional.
Isn't he white?
Yeah, I don't know.
What is his name? Badzu or Kazuki or Suzuki?
It's a odd last name, but he threw a touchdown pass. He ran. He receives. He does a lot of different things. So there's some
another
guys out there.
storyline for this past season of the rookie production.
Yeah, that was something I was.
There were some productive rookies
because
you come into the NFL and you're showing them how it's done. Are you kidding me?
2 guys specifically that I'm looking at that were in round 14 and round 15. In round 14, I got Brian Thomas Jr., who was the standout for the Jaguars, and now a lot of people are saying he's going to be possibly a second-round pick in fantasy next year. I don't know if I'm ready to go there yet, just because the Jaguars are kind of a mess right now.
Yeah,
but he's really talented. And then in round 15 is where Ian drafted Brock Bowers.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I was like, okay, just give me the guy.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
Yeah, and Brock Bowers is now going to be your number 1 tight end. He's going to be Travis Kelce. If you want him, it's going to have to be 2nd, 3rd round potentially.
Yeah,
and isn't it wild? He has no quarterback.
Yeah,
at all.
It just doesn't matter.
So productive.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I reluctantly, usually I'm better at knowing wide receivers, running backs that are coming in as rookies. And I knew Brock Bowers is outstanding, one of the highest touted prospects that we've had in forever. But I just wasn't 100% sure of how he was going to make the transition in the NFL.
Well, he kind of found in the real draft.
And especially they drafted Michael Mayer the year before.
Right.
And then they didn't use him. And he was also pretty highly touted at the time. Not to the same degree as Brock Bowers, but I was like, it's the Raiders. They got Devontae Adams still. And then as soon as Devontae Adams was gone, Brock Bowers was number 1 guy.
Yeah. Now, one thing I take pride in is my waiver wire skills. And I follow that closely. And I monitor trends on the waiver wire. And one of the picks that I'm most proud of is Bucky Irving. I picked him up off the waiver wire, and he was really solid for me the second half of the season. So that was one of my big scores on the waiver wire was Bucky Irving. I mean, I think he's a candidate for Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, and if the Bucks don't do anything in the offseason, he could be right back in the mix as like third, fourth round pick, I would think, and maybe earlier depending on what happens. The only scary thing is that does Bucky Irving become the next Dameon Pierce type guy?
Right.
Where he has an outstanding rookie season, he looks, solid, and then goes away. Yeah. Or is he the opposite and he's Kyron Williams?
Yeah.
Like which one is he going to be? It's hard to say.
Gurley do that? Gurley had like an outstanding rookie season, then he disappeared in season 2, and then he came back in 3, and then that was
he had a couple, but his fall off was real bad.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I think looking at the rookies is always important. There's some good wide receivers in this rookie class too.
Those can be hard to predict.
Yeah, they're not as good as this year's, but there's some good ones there. I think the landing spots for a lot of them might be worse than they have been in the past. My favorite wide receiver rookie right now is Tate McMillan, Tataroa McMillan. He played for Arizona. Just a big body, go up and get it. If he gets in the right place, maybe, but a lot of the early draft spots for him are not so great.
Yeah.
So
and you look at some promising rookies from this past season that just suffered because of the team they were on. Look at Malik Neighbors. Mm-hmm. He came out of the gate and you're like, oh my God, this guy looks fantastic, and then he all but vanished. And then you look at with the Cardinals,
Marvin Harrison Jr.
Right. Like he had a 2 TD game early on, and
he hurt a lot of,
and then he disappeared.
He hurt a lot of drafters. Malik Neighbors, though, he finished strong. He ended up. Did Brock Bowers pass him for the all-time rookie catches? I believe he did.
Going.
I think
it was Brock.
I think Brock Bowers got enough. So Brock Bowers had the number 1 rookie catches, and he's a tight end. But Malik Neighbors is right behind him. So both of those guys got a lot of targets and a lot of catches to end the season. So I think they're going to still get a lot of looks. The Raiders might change a little bit because they have coaches up in the air. But the Giants, they kept all their coaches. They didn't fire anybody.
Which is
so Malik Neighbors is still going to be the number 1 option there.
Yeah.
And they're going to draft a quarterback that's hopefully better. That was my other thing I was going to point out. After seeing Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix this year, don't get excited about the quarterbacks next year.
Yeah.
There's some, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward. Those are the 2 big names.
See it, though.
They're not on the same level. Jaden Daniels was like one of my favorite prospects in a long time. Drake May, I think, could get better next year. But the rookie quarterbacks sometimes can help and be good. But if you're drafting a rookie quarterback in fantasy, I would always say get a safe quarterback to go along with them. That's why a lot of people that drafted Jaden Daniels would say get like a Jared Goff or a Baker Mayfield, somebody that you can get later.
And
that's a little more risk adverse.
Yeah.
But Baker did have a lot of turnovers. So
yeah, true.
Yeah. I think my emphasis next draft, again, pull out your pen. I want to stash some rookies. I want to target 2nd and 3rd year players, the young guys. And as well as Chase and Jefferson did, if they fall to me, I might take that chance on them. But I like the young emerging talent. You guys can have the stars who, risk injury and stuff like that. And injury is always going to be a risk, but more so with the guys who are in their mid to late 20s, approaching 30,
Yeah.
So that's going to be my strategy come draft day is 2nd, 3rd year players and stash some rookies.
Ian, what would you say is your number 1 advice for people going into next year?
For people going into next year, number 1 word of advice.
It can be about drafting. It can be about just general fantasy, just something.
Did you make any trades? At all?
I really never trade in fantasy. I don't know. Waiver wire is a bit of a blind spot for me too. But there's a lot of bad teams in the league right now, it seems, but it also seems like there's a lot of really bad defenses.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity, but you just to me it's all about a blend, a good mix Because Tracy did a couple weeks of over 200 points or 180. She really
had some high scoring.
And in the championship game, for her to put up 130, I would say is a bit of an anomaly.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So if you can just find a good blend of consistent,
right,
and things I avoid. So with Brees Hall, A, he's a Jet. Yeah. Strike one.
The bad teams.
B, had an ACL injury in his past.
Mm-hmm.
That could work against you though, because maybe, okay, he's a year removed from that. Now he's really rocking and rolling. You don't have to worry about him maybe getting hurt again catastrophically like that. Whereas, okay, this person's never had a major knee or Achilles injury,
mm-hmm.
so it might happen to them. So there's risk either way, but generally I do try to avoid players that have been injured.
Yeah.
I'm going to disagree with Joey on when you said players on bad teams, because there have been some really great fantasy players on really bad teams.
I was going to make that caveat, but I agree. Like, you got to be careful with bad players. Just because they're on a bad team, they're not going to score very often. But
they're going to be playing catch up.
Yes. So that is the thing. If they are a team that funnels to one guy, similar how Malik Neighbors was, then I would say it's okay. But on the opposite side, not that he's to the level of Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson had a ton of catches for like 2 yards every time he caught the ball. So he's only getting points for his catches, not his yardage.
You would get so mad at the fourth quarter of a game when like your opponent would have a player that would just get stinks and dunks and catches, and you're like, come on!
You just watch that lead slip away.
Yeah,
from Wan'Dale Robinson.
I want to hear that. I heard somebody say that Wan'Dale Robinson is like the first player to get like so many targets and have less than 700 yards.
Wow,
total.
Dang.
So it's crazy. So there's some give and take to that.
Now, something I did this past season that I had a lot of fun with, and this is going to be a trend for me. I'm going to do this from here on out in all my leagues. I streamed defenses all season long. I would look to see who's on the waiver wire. I would see who their opponents were going to be. If there was a defense, even a mediocre defense that was playing a really bad team, I'd pick them up and start them and get 20 points. So I had a lot of fun streaming defenses. That's something I'm going to stick with.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out, too, because, like, kicking kind of falls into that category. Like, Ian took Justin Tucker in round 10, and then if you look at some of the players that went after Justin Tucker, I got Jaden Daniels a round later. Tracy got Brian Robinson and Joe Burrow after that. Jared Goff was taken. So, like, that's the thing that I bring up a lot. And Xavier Worthy was taken in round 13. Jamison Williams was taken in round 14.
Oh, man.
That's when I got Brian Thomas, Brock Bowers. So that's why I've always went to the strategy of drafting a kicker last and a defense last. Those are my last two positions every time.
Yeah.
Now, Brandon Aubrey has proved me wrong, and like last year especially.
Such a fluke, though, man.
But I think this year especially, we saw a lot of the best kickers struggle. I don't know why it was, but Justin Tucker missed a couple.
We're talking extra points and short yardage.
Brandon Aubrey missed a couple kicks late in the season. So, like, to me, it's just not worth it. Now, in our bigger league where kickers get some bonus points, I can understand it.
Yeah.
But in like a general standard league or PPR league where you're not really getting bonuses for extra yardage, I just wait till the last pick because some of those late rounds you can get the crazy rookie steals and stuff. So
and the other league that we're in, it's an auction league, and I will never pay more than $1 for a kicker.
Yeah,
I see people getting into a bidding war over a kicker, I'm like, good.
Yeah,
have at it.
I told myself this year, I said I was going to throw out Brandon Aubrey for $3, and if somebody outbid me, that's fine. That's $3 off the table, and that's what I did. Yeah. And I think they went up to like $6 or $7 or something like that.
So I'm not going to waste in a standard draft. I'm not going to waste a high pick on a defense or a kicker. Those can wait. Get those skill positions filled up. Even fill up your bench before you start going to kickers.
See, having drafted Tucker.
No, I wasn't trying to call you out.
No, I know.
Brandon Aubrey was right after that, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think I was debating one of those two guys because I view the kicker and the defense as I view the quarterback, where if you can get an outlier, one of two.
That's true.
And if I felt good, I had Amon-Ra, I had Saquon, I had whomever else. If I'm feeling good, and I'm like, if I can get a guy that I know is going to bank in 10 or 15 that
Yeah.
are kind of a free roll, if you will,
Right.
from those positions. I try to do that.
Yeah. I do get that. I get the upside of it. Just because it's outliers. Like again, 2 years ago, Cowboys defense,
Oh my
when
God.
they had all those pick sixes, were
Right.
an outlier.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that's never happened before, but they were a valuable defense to have. So you just played them every
It
week.
was kind of like the Vikings this year. They
Yeah.
had a really high.
Yeah, they had a lot of
defense.
turnovers and things like that,
Yeah.
so they got a lot of points. So you didn't really have to swap them out for too many matchups. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's just hard to come by too often. So
Yeah.
usually I go the opposite way, but I do understand the point of it. What was my advice that I was going to give? I got thrown off. Mine was basically the idea of just making sure that, going after the guys that people forget about. So I'll tip my hat a little bit. This year, one of the players that was at the top of the draft that I think people forget about going into next year because of how bad their team was, but they're going to have most of the same personnel, is a guy like CeeDee Lamb. Now, I hate the Cowboys. I don't really want a Cowboy. But Dak loves throwing to CeeDee Lamb. They're not getting a new quarterback. They're not going to get – they maybe get a new running back, and maybe their new head coach is going to run the ball a little bit more. But CeeDee Lamb is still the number one option. I think going into next year's draft, CeeDee Lamb is going to be discounted a little bit.
Yeah.
I always try not to go after the guy – like Jamar Chase was number one this year. Not too often do we see guys go back-to-back as the number one guy. Or you think of like guys like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. They went deep into the playoffs. Saquon's going really deep into the playoffs with a ton of touches. He's had some injuries in the past. It makes you a little bit leery. So he's going to go higher in the draft. I try to avoid the guys, and I try to go for that next level guy of hopefully that's going to make the comeback. Not necessarily coming off of an injury, but a guy that somebody kind of forgets about. Like I think going into next season, people are going to kind of forget about Devon Achane and stuff because he plays for the Dolphins. The Dolphins are a mess right now. But he gets a ton of catches. He runs the ball pretty effectively, and he tends to get touchdowns, especially late in the season. Guys like Chase Brown. Everybody wants Joe Burrow. They want Jamar Chase. But Chase Brown had a really, really good end of the season. If they don't have any personnel changes, that's a guy that I would put up on my draft board. So I try to look ahead a little bit and try not to mimic what happened last year.
Yeah. One thing I think about on draft day, and this is my advice to anyone who wants to try fantasy football, draft the guys you like. You don't necessarily have to listen to the pundits and the experts telling you who to draft. Draft who you like. I remember on draft day getting my cheat sheet and questioning why David Montgomery was so low in the running back rankings. And I'm thinking, well, somebody knows something I don't. Why is he so low? And because he was so low, I avoided him. And I regretted that. I would have loved to have had Montgomery on my team, at least until, he got hurt. But he was fun. He was scoring. You got Sonic and Hedgehog.
Sonic and Knuckles.
But draft the players you like. It makes the season fun. And don't overanalyze everything and go, well, the pundits are saying this. Like, in hindsight, I wish I would have taken Montgomery as one of my top 3 running backs. That would have been a lot of fun. But
Definitely.
Yeah.
So.
I always say make some of your own conclusions because I think of like the March Madness tournament every year. I've been playing basketball my entire life, and I'm getting beat up by every woman in my family when we do our family bracket because they don't have any background knowledge.
Yeah.
They like the colors.
Exactly. They pick certain teams that they think looks good. They have a specific coach that they're like, oh, that coach is cute.
Yeah.
And they go off of them. Sometimes that's just the best way to do it, though, is that you just don't have any background because sometimes you can know too much. And that was one of the things that I told Tracy when she ended last season. She's like, what should I do to research next year? I said, watch the draft, get an idea of where guys are going, maybe watch an off-season thing of what people think about these players going to these new teams, but then just kind of come to your own conclusions and just live with it. Overanalyzing kills you, and that's what I do every year in March Madness. So I kind of keep it that way in fantasy where I try to say, I like these guys. I think this guy will have a better season, but maybe it's just a feeling. It's not necessarily because of analytics.
Yeah. And it's, as you know, there are teams that I like drafting players from, and there are teams I will not draft a player from. I don't like having Cowboys on my team, even though I did have Ferguson. I don't like having Packers. They're just teams Steelers. I don't think I've ever had a Steeler on my fantasy. They're just teams I avoid, teams that I like, and I want to have players from those teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, well, I think that about wraps it up. We got a Cowboy stew to get to.
That's right. It's been simmering.
Yeah. So congratulations once again to Ian.
Thank you.
Winning the second season of the comeback of the ONTV Fantasy Football League.
2.0.
Yeah. Looking forward to next season. As always, I'm already overanalyzing, like I just said, not to do, but I'm watching all the fantasy stuff throughout the offseason because I'm a sicko. But hopefully you guys all had fun, enjoyed it, and come back better and stronger next year with more fantasy football. Congratulations, Ian.
God bless. Adios.